А говорить можно медленно, не останавливаясь. Параллельно идет перевод.
Не так медленно.
Нет, ну в смысле перевод идет, да? Параллельно.
Это с английского на русский, если понадобится, надевайте наушники.
А, с английского на русский.
Прием, прием, тест английского канала. Это тест английского канала. Прием.
Да, здравствуйте, здравствуйте, здравствуйте. Ну-ка, хорошо, далеко. Нас слышно?
Can you hear the speakers? Yes. Dear English presenters, can you hear me?
Hi, it's Sebastian here.
Hello, Sebastian. Can we test your presentation right now?
Certainly. You see that all right?
Yes, great. We can see everything perfectly. Thank you. What's about Miss Stammler-Grossman? Thank you, Sebastian. Анна Штамлер-Гроссман.
Можете переводить, пожалуйста?
Добрый день, уважаемые наши
Hello,
иностранные спикеры.
dear
Прошу вас переключить
speakers from
клавиши
abroad. If
иконка
you
на
still haven't
английский язык.
switched to English translation, please do. But if you have, please let us know that everybody can hear us. So please, English speakers, please let us know that everything works fine in your Zoom with your Zoom translation. That you can hear
Уважаемые спикеры,
everything.
вы смогли перевести кнопку
Dear speakers, please let us
режим на
know
английский язык?
if you have switched to English in your translation options.
I can hear you well.
Спасибо. Тера, Себастьян.
Taro, is Taro there?
Тера, вы меня слышите?
What about Tero Mustonen? Can you hear us? Tero.
Мгм. Ждем Тера.
Hello.
Добрый день, Тера. Вы меня
Hello,
слышите?
it's Tero. Can you hear me?
Здравствуйте.
Can you hear me, Tero? Says the moderator.
Сколько времени?
Слышит?
So, Tero, you can hear my translation, right?
Тера слышит голос переводчика или
So,
мой голос?
Tero, do you hear the moderator or the interpreter?
Переводчика, пожалуйста.
So you can hear the interpreter, right?
Переводчика. Нужно включить режим на английский язык. Иконка на
Да.
панели планета.
So you should switch on your translation panel to English language. I think you already have done it, right? So you can hear the translation into English.
Tara, hello, can you
Tero,
hear me?
oops.
Слышит, нет? If you are in Russian channel, you need to choose English language. On the bottom of your panel, please find a special icon which looks like an earth, and you have three options. So please choose English language to hear the interpreter. Otherwise, you will hear only Russian language. Try to do this.
Yeah,
And
I'm
let-
on.
On the bottom of the window, when you open Zoom, on the bottom you can see the panel, and here you can see the icon which looks like an earth. You just click on it, and then you will see three options: Russian language, English language, and off. Please choose English language. If you choose it, you will hear only interpreter. If you still can hear me, then you use wrong option, because right now I'm on the Russian channel. Earth. Icon which looks like planet Earth, like geographical sign. Just please click on it. Is it working?
Yes.
Oh, that's good. So, хорошо, отлично.
Включите, пожалуйста, видео. Мое видео включите, пожалуйста. Что? Иностранные спикеры, прошу вас включить видеокамеры.
Please, our speakers from abroad, can you turn on your cameras? It's time now. So, our speakers from abroad, Sebastian and Tero, now you can turn on your cameras, your webcams. Now we want to see everybody because we are starting shortly. Thank you, Tero. And Sebastian, please also, can you please turn on your webcam?
Just a minute ago, the host stopped my video, and then now it's saying that unable to open camera because the host has stopped my video. So host, please enable my camera.
Okay, I forwarded your message, thank you.
Можно подключить видео Себастьяна? Отсюда отключили. Добрый день. Добрый день,
Hello,
уважаемые наши
and
спикеры,
our dear
слушатели,
speakers and the audience
форума
and participants
Северного молодежного форума.
of the Youth Northern Forum. We start the work of Ecology and Climate Change session work. Today we have here our speakers, Anna Stamler-Grossman, Professor of Arctic Center of Lapland University, Sebastian Mallgate, the founder of Arctic Youth Network from University of Queens in Canada, Nikolai Zakharov, a teacher of geography in Amga, in the Sakha Republic, Yakutia, Lyudmila Argunova, the leader of Youth Climatic Bloc at the Center of Environmental Education, Tero Musen, an ecologist, the representative of Snow Change Cooperative from Finland, Nikita Tananaev, a researcher from the Permafrost Institute, an invited professor of University of Toulouse, Larisa Shilakhovskaya, the heads of tourism, recreation, and environmental awareness raising from Russia, Albina Cherepanova, Director General of Yakutsk Center, the candidate of biological science, and Evgeny Rashkovsky, the leader of volunteering movement Green Arctic. So the time frame today is 7 minutes, so please keep within your time limits. And I would like to tell you a little bit about this session, about ecology. Currently, this topic is very relevant. Climate change, global warming, was chosen as a topic for a purpose, and I will tell you why this topic is so important for me. I'm not an expert in this field. I'm not an environmental expert, but I'm a public activist. And thanks to our experts and speakers, we would like to raise awareness of all the people in the Arctic, of what research we have, what recommendations we are having now, and we would like to show a short video I myself, I'm from Dirin, Churapcha district. Very recently, BBC made a video about Churapcha district of Yakutia and global warming. You can see here some video from my native village 15 years ago. Here, I was running around as a kid. I spent my childhood here. 15 years ago, everything here was different. The roads were level, but you can see within this few years what changes have occurred. And all the locals are really concerned about what is happening with our nature. So my mission and our mission of this session is to make everybody realize and understand what awaits us and what research we have, and to get some feedback. So now I would like to give the floor to the first speaker, which is Larissa Shilakhovskaya, the role of specially protected natural areas in safeguarding the nature of Yakutia. Hello, dear participants at the forum. Thank you for this invitation. And I would like to ask our technical staff to turn on my presentation. So while we're waiting, the topic of my report is the role of protected areas for nature conservation in Yakutia. Yakutia, as you know, is one of the largest regions in Russia. Its area is huge. Nevertheless, it's the least populated region of our country. I have to note that Yakutia is a territory where we have unique biodiversity. Also, we have a lot of endemic species of birds, animals, plants. Many of them are in the list of endangered species of Russia and Yakutia, as well as international lists. Such unique diversity is explained by vast territory. And we also know that Yakutia is a region that has quite difficult and complex social characteristics of living conditions for population, because it's very big and the terrain is quite complex. Over the last decades, we've witnessed intensive industrial development, and there was a mission, a very important one, to find a compromise, somehow to combine economic development, still supporting traditional economies. To solve this problem, in Yakutia we have created a system of protected areas. These indicators are among the highest in the country. Yakutia is the leader by number and by area of specially protected areas. Currently, such areas cover more than 1 million square kilometers within the Republic, which is over 38% of the territory of the Republic. There are 234 areas at 3 levels: regional, federal, and municipal. At the first diagram, you can see it. I would also like to speak about regional and federal experience, but in fact the number of regional protected areas prevails over the regional ones. The first areas were created in 1969, but for a long time there were not very many of them, and the areas were not very big. The system started developing from 1994 after the order of our first president, Mr. Nikolaev, and since then we had a growth in the both area and number of such protected areas. Protection of depends on the category. You can see here what categories of protected areas we have. On the diagram 3, you can see that by number of protected areas, resource reserves prevail. And this is supported by regional laws for the Republic in order to combine protection of the territory and protecting traditional economies of the population. Then we also have unique lakes and natural monuments. And on slide 4, you can see the areas. Diagram 4. Most of them are regional protected areas, resource reserves, unique lakes that you can see in the diagram. They are covering more and more area. Here you can see the approaches to protecting. And why I'm speaking about unique lakes. And you can see that protection of the lakes, as well as protected the general aspects of protected areas. We have different goals of establishing protected areas in Yakutia, such as conservation, tourism, reproduction, education, etc. In Yakutia, we have 3 federal protected areas. They're very large in Alokminsk, Ust-Lensk, and recently launched Medvezhye Islands. These protected areas have a very strict regime. Economic activities are restricted. So if such category had larger areas, that would lead to conflicts with local population, because local population is engaged in agriculture a lot, so that is a problem. There is a milder regime where we combine the nature protection, recreation, where people can recreate, plus education. Our regional protected areas prevail in this category. So this is an example on the map. In accordance with our regional law on protected areas that was adopted in 2011, we have a special category called resource reserves. They help to zone. Here you can see Amma reserve divided into 2 zones: absolute rest and traditional nature management. For example, in traditional nature management, you can make hay, seasonal hunt, of course with limits, and picking berries, for example. While in absolute rest area, any activities are prohibited, any economic activities, including mining. I should note that all of our protected areas located in all the regions of districts of Yakutia have state inspectors who are doing their service. They are tracking, monitoring so that everybody complies with the regime of this protected territory. Specially protected areas are those parts of the Republic where our organization and the Ministry of Environment are implementing different projects on improving, enhancing biodiversity. For example, the Directorate implements such projects widely known in Russia and abroad, such as reacclimatization of wood bison in central Yakutia. It's an international project. It's been held since 2006. It's already been the fourth batch of bisons brought here from Elk Island in Canada. It's one of those examples when international cooperation in conservation of rare species really brings results. In Yakutia, as far as we only have wood bisons in North America, in Yakutia we are creating a kind of a backup population for just in case of a disease or something. In North America, we still have some wood bisons here that are very successfully reacclimatizing. Also, one of the famous projects is the musk oxen project in Yakutia. We've been doing it since 1996. It's done for future, for the Arctic population. When the population will be enough, it will be used for hunting. And by example of other Arctic countries, this animal can be used in agriculture as a source of wool. I'm sorry, you're running out of time. Other interesting projects are a bear patrol in the Arctic part of Yakutia and protection of migrating birds within a variety of international agreements. We also do the list of rare and endangered species. Thank you, Larissa. That's an exciting topic. And I would like now to give the floor to Tero Mustonen, an ecologist, environmental expert from Finland, with his presentation because nomadic life in the Republic is also a relevant topic. So we would be very excited to listen to your experience in Finland against climate change. Thank you. Tero.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to connect with the participants of the NSDF. I'm also very thankful to the organizers, especially to our close friend and partner, Vladimir Vasiliev, and the new colleagues like Professor Larissa Chekholovskaya. So my name is Tero Mustonen, and I'm a Finnish geographer who has been working in Saha-Yakutia now for 16 years on the questions of traditional knowledge, biodiversity, climate change, indigenous cultures and livelihoods, including fisheries and reindeer herding. And this work started from an invitation by Professor Vasily Ropek at the Institute of Indigenous Peoples back in 2005. And we started then to focus on two regions of Saha-Yakutia. First one being Lower Kolyma area in the high Arctic, and then in the Neri-Ungri area, the Evenki community of Jengra. And we were joined by colleagues Dr. Galina Varlamova, Professor Anna Mureyeva, and Professor Tamara Andreeva, who worked with our team, especially in the Evenki context. And today I would like to tell this important forum about the work that we have done with the Evenki people on something called Evenki Atlas, which we think is a mechanism for knowledge transfer and cultural revitalization in terms of traditional nature use. I would like to dedicate this presentation. Unfortunately, we have lost Galina Varlamova and Anna Murayeva, as well as many elders and knowledgeable people in Evenki community of Yengra and the surrounding nomadic camps. So that's why the over the 16 years, the situation has been shifting quite much. If we try to summarize the kind of work that we have done over the past 16 years, we have been working with reindeer herders, women, elders, and youth of Yengra to collect a large body of what's known often as oral histories. They are indigenous observations of how change happens and what are the significant meanings and interpretations of those changes. And this has been carried out with and in close cooperation with the guidance from the Russian Academy of Sciences and their methodological and ethical boards. I'm sure that all of us know, if we focus on this time in Yengra, that it's rather famous place in Saha Yakutia for the survival of Evenki language, culture, taiga, reindeer herding, and so on. Many of our colleagues like Vladimir Kolesov, Vitaly Maximov, Kim Stepanovich Nustrov, Okteprina Naumova shared a wealth of Evenki knowledge. And this was done in the hoping or in the hope of supporting what can we do to attract young people to the reindeer herding and other traditional trades? How can we address the industrial land use impacts in southern Yakutia? And also, how do we orderly respond to the tremendous challenge of climate change that started already to have impacts in 2005 in southern Yakutia? So a large body of work was taking place using these oral histories, and many dozens of interviews were carried out on the first 5 years, and this work has still continued. Nevertheless, the primary over 100 interviews were carried out between 2005 and 2010. Then we came to a very critical question: what should we do with this material and how to communicate these as a vehicle for addressing biodiversity, climate, and Evenki culture? And there was some additional support from Professor Jelena Merkel in Nere-Jungri Technical University on place names that they worked with us on. To save time and come to the point, we launched Evenki Atlas, which can be found at the address evenkiatlas.org. And there you will find the first range of summaries of this information, both in Russian and English. There was also the potential of translating this into Evenki, but currently we heard back from the herders that the main and the community people of Yengra that will start with the Russian version and English version. And this atlas that you can find and utilize freely is a way of combining maps of nature, Evenki land use, place names, ecological information and change, important Evenki personalities and traditions. And we have to consider this atlas as the beginning of the work, and that's why we call it Evenki Atlas 1.0. Now, given the growing interest on the indigenous cultures and the Evenki themselves being in a position to add and produce more content, especially through the proliferation of cell phones and smartphones, digital cameras, and so on, we are hoping that the contents of the atlas will grow and expand to cover a larger portion of the Evenki home area. In conclusion, we can ask a critical question: why did we produce an Evenki Atlas online instead of a book? We have come to realize over the past 15, 16 years in the work in Saha-Yakutia that change is underway also in very remote camps. The future, at least for now, can be characterized as kind of a mix between traditions and the new world. And it implies that digital platforms and solutions will constitute a part of that future. We don't think in Snow Change or with the Evenki that the Atlas is the end of the line or end of the progress. Instead, we do believe it's a beginning of a support for a new kind of way Indigenous communities in Saha-Yakutia can share and voice what they know at this tremendous time of change. For science, it will also be a very important line of indicators of biodiversity, impacts on traditional livelihoods, how the taiga is changing, including forest fires, as we saw this year, and so on. And that's why we, of course, welcome the Evenki to share at contact.snowchange.org further materials as we as well go further with those.
Спасибо.
And I'll conclude by saying that for 2021, we are planning inclusion of over 50 videos from the historical archives, and this will hopefully stimulate pride, self-esteem, and living communities on their own terms. So that's why the Evenki Atlas will constitute important vehicle for monitoring, cultural indicators, action on climate change, and ultimately will be able to communicate a joint response to the profound changes underway. Thank you very much.
Спасибо. Спасибо, Тера.
Thank you, Tero.
Эвенкийский атлас
Indeed,
очень
Evenki
заинтересовал,
Atlas
и
is
хотела бы
very
немножко
interesting
добавить. Я
project, and I would like to add that right now I'm working on the field of culturology, and let's include in the resolution the suggestion to introduce into a federal sub-program Children of Arctic, our sub-program on the Evenki Atlas. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Anne Stamler-Grossman, research fellow from University of Lapland, the Arctic Center. I met her last year, and thanks to her, I am here right now. Last year, Anne initiated the conference on degradation of permafrost in Churapcha, where I was just a participant. But this topic was so touching for me, and right now I'm as an activist, I'm working in this domain. Thank you, Anna, so I give the floor to you.
Анна?
Anna, are you here?
Вы меня видите?
Can you see me?
Вы видите мою
Can you see
презентацию?
my presentation?
Презентация, да.
Yes, we can see your presentation,
Вас не видно.
but we cannot see you.
Меня не будет видно, потому что
No, you won't be able to see me
камера не работает.
because my webcam is out of
Hello
order.
everybody, I'm Anna Stamler-Grossman from Arctic Center in Finland. I will try to speak Russian, as far as the most of the participants are so just from Russia, and I will start with saying that I'm social. Я буду говорить, стараться по-русски.
I will try to speak Russian,
Я
and
социальный
I'm a
антрополог,
social
и
anthropologist,
это моя тема сегодня
and my
называется
topic today
социальные
is social
характеристики
properties of
пермафрост.
permafrost.
Когда мы говорим
When
про
we
мерзлоту,
speak
то
about
мы
permafrost,
уже и
Анна, можно вас попросить?
from the Anna,
презентацию
can I
поставить
ask
на
you
полноэкранный режим?
to switch to the full screen mode, because we can see your
вот сейчас
desktop.
Да. Презентацию в полный режим.
We need
нужно
to see
поставить.
your presentation full screen. You have to switch to full screen mode.
Вот сейчас в полном режиме.
Is it
Нет.
full screen now? No.
I don't know how it works. Это вот. Я вижу, вот я могу только сделать это.
Ну, давайте тогда продолжим работу. Не будем отвлекаться.
Okay, we'll continue like this for now.
Now I don't see the screen at all. Sorry. А вы можете включить мою презентацию
Can you maybe
сейчас?
show my presentation then from your
Только
end?
вы можете включить.
No, only
Что
you.
я послала, она не
But I
не
sent
работает.
having difficulties
Полноэкранный режим.
with full screen mode.
So I'm very sorry. This is
Мгм. Да, ничего страшного, тогда сейчас включаем, дальше продолжаем.
So we continue
Анна,
then.
вам слово.
Anna,
да,
let's
но
continue.
когда мы говорим про
So when we
мерзлоту, даже в
talk about
криологии,
permafrost,
это
even in
имеет самые
Cryology,
различные характеристики.
there are a
Например, мы
whole
говорим об
variety of
активной
properties: active
мерзлоте,
permafrost,
сухая,
dry
induced,
permafrost,
layered,
layered,
passive, sporadic, спорадическая
sporadic,
и пассивная.
passive.
Но когда мы касаемся
But
социальных
when we
вопросов,
talk about social
то
dimension,
возникают совсем
we
другие
have completely
характеристики.
different properties.
И сейчас я еще раз попробую
And right now I will try
включить.
to share my presentation again.
Может быть, получится.
Да, вы включили.
Теперь это будет как PowerPoint, но я не могу. Так, ну придется в таком смотреть режиме. Я просто
Let's do it in
посмотрела,
this
почему
mode then. I
Саха-Якутия
looked up why Sakha-Yakutia
буквально в последнее
recently
время
was
в различных
in
медиа
all the headlines
очень
around the
вот
world.
это презентации от
So these
BBC,
are
немецких
materials
и
from
российских
BBC,
новостях.
Deutsche Welle,
И это
Russian
не
news,
совершенно случайно,
It's,
потому что в
for a
Якутии
reason,
примерно больше
because
90%
over 90% of
присутствия
Yakutia
вечной
is
мерзлоты.
affected
Но
by permafrost.
когда мы касаемся
But when we
вопросов
go into
социальных,
social
то мы видим, что
aspects, we see
мерзлота это
that
не только важный
permafrost is not
компонент
just a key
криосфере,
component
но
of
также и в
cryosphere,
обществе.
but also
Ну,
a
прежде
component of
всего, это,
society.
конечно, в
First of
вопросах
all, in
инженерных
terms
вопросов,
of
строительства
engineering,
домов и
construction,
инфраструктуры.
infrastructure,
Это вопрос
aspects of
безопасности и вопрос
safety,
сообщения между
aspects of
различными
connectivity
поселками
and
или пунктами.
connections, communications, also some traditional practices, as you can see here in the photo.
Хранение продуктов.
It's the storage of food. Again, it's the aspect of pastures, of haymaking areas for agriculture. But also, it's the aspect of religious views, of cosmology, and spiritual concepts of identity, regional identity. We also can mention here health aspects. Recently, in 2016, there was an epidemic of anthrax, Sibirskaya язва, the anthrax.
которые вышли
the spores
во
of
время
anthrax
таяния пород
that escaped from
Ямальском
melting
полуострове.
rock in
Это вопросы
Yamal.
и туризма, и
Of
также,
course,
например,
it
как здесь вы видите на этом
involves
слайде,
tourism, and as you can see in this photo,
даже
it's also it also has
касается
an
искусства
artistic
своего
aspect
рода.
in
Чтобы
some
показать
sense.
примеры,
To show you
вот
some examples,
эта
these
фотография на
photos
правая верхняя фотография, я ее
on the
сделала в
right top,
Татинском Руси в
I made it
2010
in
году.
Tata
Но в
district
то
in
время это не
2010.
было большой такой темой.
It was not a
И
big topic back
почему
then,
сейчас
but
вопрос,
why now?
касающийся
Why
вот
the
этих многолетних
issues of
мерзлотных пород, стал
permafrost
таким
is
актуальным?
burning,
И здесь я
has
должна
become so
сказать, это
burning
вопрос
now,
скорости
because
и
it's
вопрос
the
размаха
question
и
of both
интенсивности.
speed
Вот эти
or
остальные
rate
фотографии были
and
сделаны в
scale.
Чурапчинском
These photos were made in Churapcha
улусе,
district,
и вы видите
and you can
вот
see
эти выступления,
these
они очень
hillocks.
приобретают очень большой размах. Вот
They
на
are
нижней
increasing their
фотографии вы
scale.
видите, по-моему, это участок, который был
Below you
отведен
can
для
see a
строительства
plot that was
домов
planned
для
for
молодежи.
housing construction.
И вот как такой пример, это
Another example
это мое полевое
is my
исследование в
field
немецком
research in
автономном
Nenets
округе. И вот
autonomous
этот дом,
okrug.
где вы видите,
This house
он
that you
стоял
can
вот
see,
здесь,
it
в
was
2008
right
году,
here
когда я
in
была, его снесли.
2008. It was
В
demolished
результате вот этой эрозии
due to erosion.
под угрозой находятся не только дома, но и,
Erosion
например,
endangers not only
кладбища
houses,
вот в этом
but
поселке.
also
Почти
cemeteries
половина
in this
кладбища
village.
уже
Half of a cemetery
снесена и
is
ушла
already
в Печору.
down the Pechora River.
Вопрос интенсивности, вы видите, это вот
The
в
rate
Татинском, когда я
and
делала
the
экспедицию, это я сделала
intensiveness.
фотографию того же
It's a river
участка
in Tata
до
district of Yakutia. It's the same
наводнения и после наводнения.
plot
То есть
before
иногда
and
мы
after the
имеем
flood.
сейчас то слишком много воды,
So we have
то
either
сейчас,
too much water
как это было в прошлом году,
or, like last year,
совсем мало
we have
воды.
too little water.
Как, если вы помните,
As you
жители
remember,
Якутии помнят, наверное,
locals of
засуху
Yakutia
прошлых
remember
годов.
the drought of
И
the recent years.
когда я спросила
When I
в
asked
прошлом году,
last year
что я бы хотела организовать
that I would like
большой
to
семинар
organize
в
a
Якутии по
seminar in
проекту
Yakutia,
ISLO, и мои
ISLO
коллеги
project,
в
ISLO
Якутске
project.
сказали,
My colleagues in Yakutsk
едем в
said,
Чурапчу.
let's go to Churapcha.
И совершенно неожиданно для
Unexpectedly,
меня этот небольшой
this small
запланированный
planned
семинар превратился
workshop
в большую
turned
конференцию, на
into
которой
quite a large
участники, вот
conference,
как вы уже сказали,
as you mentioned,
приехали на свои собственные средства,
attended by participants
просто
at their own cost,
добровольно. И
voluntarily.
вот такая огромная
So
конференция
we had
получилась.
quite a large
И в
conference,
результате состав участников был
and among participants
очень разнородный. И
were
тема была, в
various
принципе,
people.
одна.
But the
Вопросы,
theme was
касающиеся вот этих
one,
многолетних ледовых
the
пород.
issues of
И
permafrost.
вдруг выяснилось,
And
что
we found out
у этой темы очень много
that there
аспектов.
are so many aspects to this topic.
Многие были озабочены
There were many
не только
concerns
вопросами
about not only
строительства,
construction,
украшения для жилых домов или
of houses or infrastructure, but
также были
also
озабочены очень вопросами
concerns
юридическими.
of legal nature.
Если, например,
For example,
дом пострадал от наводнения,
if
то
a
есть
house
будет
was
одна
damaged by flood,
юридическая концепция.
then there is
Но если
one
дом пострадал
legal
от,
concept. But if a house was
колебаний
damaged
вот,
by
этих мерзлотных породах,
fluctuation
то
of permafrost,
эта
then
форма уже не подходит.
it's
То
completely
есть это
another legal
вопрос
form.
легальных,
So there are also a lot of
вопросов
legal
также. И
concerns.
я хочу просто сказать, что
And I want to say
социальная жизнь
that
вот этих
social life
климатических
of
моделей,
these climatic
она только
models
становится
is only becoming
в фокусе
in the focus
научных
of
исследований. Она в
science.
своей очень инфантильной
It's
фазе,
at
но
a
также
baby stage
приобрела
right now,
большой публичный резонанс.
but it is now widely known.
Поэтому после вот этой конференции,
After that conference,
когда
when
мы встречались
we met
с
with
журналистами
reporters from New York Times, they were very interested in the results of the conference. They came here, and so it gained some international attention. Anna, we are running out of time, so this is my last slide. I think that it is important to make joint efforts, not only academic efforts, but also use traditional knowledge of local population. They are critical for us because permafrost is also very beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna, for your presentation. And now the floor goes to Sebastian Mallgate from Arctic Youth Network from Queen's University, Canada. Please, Sebastian.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me here. And a particular thank you to the excellent translators who are helping us understand each other. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to listen to all these experts working very hard in important fields. We've heard a few stories here of how climate change is really transforming the Arctic, and especially how there's an important social dimension to that. And I'm here to tell you that youth are in many ways at the forefront of the changes being experienced due to climate change. That in one sense, they are on the ground living the changes, seeing their communities shift, the livelihoods of their families be affected, and also, possibly have the very existence of their communities threatened. But that means that they're also often at the forefront of activism and work to try and address these changes and try to adapt and to work with their governments, organizations, and international institutions to have their voices heard so that possibly we can work together to start addressing these problems and the root causes of this change. So youth, when youth get together, amazing things can happen. And I think the Arctic Youth Network is really a phenomenal example of that. There was a group of youth who had been meeting up at various Arctic conferences and really recognizing that there was a gap in the Arctic landscape, in that there were all sorts of really engaged youth trying to make change in their communities, trying to be leaders in this new world, but often they didn't have access to the opportunities, experiences, and resources that they needed to either develop as the leaders they wanted to be, or to actually get some traction in the change they wanted to make. And so the Arctic Youth Network was put together to address this gap, founded by a very international cross-cultural group of youth in late 2018, early 2019, to address this gap, to support and connect youth making change in the Arctic. And in the last year and a half, we've seen incredible development and momentum. We've really seen that there's a desire among governments, organizations, and youth elsewhere to facilitate youth involvement in change making across the Arctic. And so we aim to connect youth across borders and across cultures, so Indigenous youth, non-Indigenous youth, Northerners and Southerners, in a collaborative approach to really have youth voices heard and to help them develop their leadership capacity. And in the last year and a half, we've seen about 430 new members through organic growth, representing people from youth from all Arctic regions. And we've put a lot of work into developing it into a real international non-for-profit organization. And so the goal of supporting and connecting youth to enable them to make the change they want to make happens through a few different lenses here. And the first is really through connecting youth to opportunities and resources that they can, from which they can learn to get experience with the decision-making processes that are actually making change in the Arctic, that are setting policy and making laws and conducting research and sharing information. And so we work to connect youth with all sorts of organizations and institutions. And it's also about just giving youth a voice in the international sphere. You know, youth who are often in remote communities or have limited internet access, or who are just not involved in the larger Arctic sphere. When we are able to support them in engaging with these larger processes and institutions, the stories that they can tell and the work that they can contribute is really impactful. And finally, it does come down to learning. It's giving Indigenous youth a voice and a platform, while also providing an opportunity for non-Indigenous youth and Southerners from across the world to learn about the realities of the Arctic and to contribute in a collaborative fashion and to really develop as true allies where Arctic voices are prioritized. So this broad mission we carry out in a few ways. And the first is through partnerships and collaborations with major organizations, governments, and institutions in the North. We essentially offer a service where we will work to develop a project with an organization and find youth from across the Arctic with strong regional and cultural representation to give them an opportunity to work in the organization's processes, to actually give them a stake in the larger actions that are happening. We also work to share and are starting to produce in-house programming that is meant to give youth a voice to inform others about what they care about, the issues that are relevant in their day-to-day lives. And so we do that through sharing and aggregating resources, but also we are just about to launch what's essentially a publishing platform, because there are some good resources out there where you can get published, you can get your story heard, but often they're only accessible to a very select group of people, and often a group of people who already have access to the support they need. And so we're working to bridge that gap and to support young creators in telling their stories really from the start. So people who haven't had experience writing, or for whom English is not their first language, we can support them in the process of telling their stories and publish their work. And we're also establishing publishing partnerships with several major publishing platforms in the Arctic sphere to try and give them a much larger audience and to really get their voices heard as broadly as possible. We also work with issue-specific
Себастьян,
groups.
можно вопрос?
Pardon me?
Вашу организацию
I have a
входят
question.
наши регионы России?
Do you have any Russian regions present in your network?
Yes, we're represented. We have many Russian members, I'll say, and we're starting to work. You may know that the chairmanship of the Arctic Council is shifting to Russia, and so for the next about 2 years, we'll be hosted by Russia. And we're working with Molodoj, the Russian Youth Agency, and are hoping to start talks with several northern regional governments to facilitate some youth-specific programming. And in fact, we are just shifting. We're incorporating a new board of directors. I chair the board of directors, and one of the representatives on our new board of directors is from Yakutia. So I would say that there is Russian representation, and we're working to develop even further
Спасибо большое, Себастьян.
projects based in Russia. So I would encourage
У нас время
anyone
заканчивается.
to reach out. We'll have some contact stuff at the end, so I encourage you to reach out. But
Да, спасибо.
yeah, we work to connect youth with all sorts of organizations to develop programming. We've got issue-specific groups working. We send delegations to conferences. We have regional chapters to try and offer a structure for youth to have international support while working very specifically in their regions. So this is a broad overview, and I will try to keep it brief at that. But I would encourage you to, anytime
Спасибо. У нас время
we're working
закончилось.
in the Arctic, it's impression. Representation is important, and youth is a group not to be ignored, because youth are really very committed to making change, and they have the interest to learn.
Sebastian,
work.
unfortunately, we are running out of time, so thank you for your presentation. That was very
Well,
interesting.
I encourage you to go to ayn.link. That will send that. You'll find
Yeah.
everything there. ayn.link. Thank
Yeah,
you so
we can-
much.
We can see that. Thank you.
Себастьян, спасибо большое. Слово передаем Николаю Семеновичу Захарову, учителю географии Амгинского лицея.
Thank you,
У него
Sebastian. And
тема,
now the floor goes to
возможные
Nikolai
последствия сплошной
Zakharov,
вырубки
the teacher of
леса на
geography, who is
состояние
going to
многолетних мерзлых грунтов и условиях
talk about the
южных
impact of
криолитных зон. Сейчас
wood cutting
эта
on
тема
permafrost.
актуальна как
This is a
никогда.
very relevant
Вырубка
question
леса,
now, because
нас
clearing
обсуждается с лета,
of the
и
woods
хотелось бы
has been
донести до
discussed here
общественников, до
from
населения,
summer,
какие
and
ведутся у нас
so
исследования
we
по
would like to
возможным
inform
последствиям.
on
Николай
the
Семенович.
potential impact.
Здравствуйте, добрый вечер, участники конференции.
Good evening,
Меня
dear
зовут Захаров
participants of
Николай
the
Семенович. Я
conference. My
сейчас
name is
демонстрацию экрана
Nikolai Zakharov, and I'm
включу
going to
и включу
share
свою
my
презентацию.
presentation now.
Значит, мой доклад называется «Возможные последствия
So
сплошной вырубки леса».
the potential
на
impact
состояние
of the
многолетних
continuous
мерзлых пород в
cutting
условиях
of the forest
южно-периодической зоны.
on
На примере
permafrost at the case of Amga region.
Леса, произрастающие в условиях распространения многолетних мерзлых пород,
So the
уникальны
forests
по
which
своим
grow
качествам
on
и выполняемым
permafrost are
функциям.
unique in terms
Они
of their
обладают низкими
functions and
показателями
properties.
биологической
So they
продуктивности
have very
и
low
необходимостью и
biological
уязвимостью к
productivity,
воздействию
and they are
определенных
very
факторов.
vulnerable to the
Нарушение
human
равновесия системы
impact.
лес-мерзлота нередко
And
приводит к активизации
this
патогенных процессов
balance
и
in the forest
сопровождается
permafrost
изменением в ландшафте
very
и
often
загрязнением
leads to some
близлежащих водоемов.
destructive
Одной из
processes
наиболее
and
важных
also
функций северных
impacts
лесов является их роль в сохранении
water
мерзлоты.
bodies.
В
So
таких
because
лесах
forests
необходимо
play an
ведение
important part in
специфического
the
лесного хозяйства
preservation
и
of
лесоповедения.
forests. So that's why in these areas we
Территория
need to
Амгинского
introduce
руса
a
расположена в пределах
special
глубоких
forestry
водоемных
regime.
с сплошным распространением
So
многолетних
Amga
мерзлых
region
пород
in the
и
red box
где
also
выделяется шесть
lies
типов
in
местности.
the zone of
Это
continuous permafrost. So
склоновый,
there are
низкотеррасовый,
different
мелководный, так называемый
terrains.
off-area
So you have
межеластном и аластном,
small
собственно,
valleys, and you
пермакарстах.
have these openings
По
and
лесорастительному
slopes and
районированию
so
территория
on.
Амгинского улуса входит в центрально-аластный
So this is
прибрежный
the
округ.
central
В лесном покрове
Alas and middle taiga.
господствующее положение занимает,
So the
конечно же,
dominant
лиственница
tree
Хайндера,
species
которая
is the
занимает
Kainda large tree,
72%
which
всех
accounts to
лесопокрытых
72%
площадей.
of the forests in
На втором
the
месте у
region.
нас растет сосна
So the
обыкновенная,
second
которая занимает
most common
где-то от
species
18 до
is
20%
the
территории.
pine,
В подчиненном
taking some 18
положении
to
находится
20%,
сибирская,
and there are
занимающая
some
прекрасные и редко заливаемые пойменные участки,
spruces and
и береза
also birch
плосколистная,
trees,
произрастающая на высокоплодородных межлетных
which
половых
grows
каменных
on highly
почвах.
productive permafrost
Ниже
soils.
впадения реки Танха левого притока Амги надпойменная терраса выражена хорошо и расширяется
So we
до 5
have
километров. Здесь
a
широко
wide
распространены так
river
называемые
valley.
табуны, своеобразный ландшафт с
So
нарушенной
it has
остепненной
this typical
растительностью, только
steppe-like
в вольне реки Амги.
vegetation.
Кстати, на этих табунах
So this
у нас в
terrain is
Амгинском
called
улусе
Dabun,
выращивают
and this is
пшеницу
the place
в
where
разные
they
зимовые
can
культуры.
cultivate even wheat.
Амгинский улус
So
расположен в зоне
Amga
сплошного
region
распространения
is
многолетних
located in the
грунтов.
zone of continuous
Мощность мерзлоты здесь
permafrost, and
достигает
the
от 150 в
depth
среднем до
of
400
permafrost
метров. Средняя
makes
температура
from
мерзлоты
150 to
примерно
300 meters,
от минус 1,5
and
градусов до
the
минус
average
4
temperature
градусов.
is from minus 1.5 to 4 degrees centigrade.
Особенности развития лесного покрова Амгинского
So
улуса следующие.
what are the
Во-первых, среди них
peculiarities of the forest cover? So the dominant is light coniferous trees like large trees, and dark coniferous trees like spruces are common only on the riverbanks.
Ученые неоднократно отмечали относительно благоприятную экологическую ситуацию в бассейне реки
So in
Амги.
general, the environmental situation is quite favorable. It is still the purest and environmentally favorable region in central Yakutia. So recently the public have been discussing the permafrost degradation in central Yakutia, and even in our region we also have some examples. For example, the Chakra Village. So it started from the expansion of silkworm, and due to the massive destruction of forests, there appeared lots of thermokarst lakes. So we analyzed satellite images made in 1999. So we see some 115 lakes around the village. In the year 2009, after the forest was destroyed by the silkworm, there appeared new lakes totaling to 130, and the number is still growing. So you see the result of this permafrost degradation near the village of Chakur. So we see a lot of thermokarst lakes, ravines, and hollows, and in some places the lakes are down to 4 meters deep, and they actually pose a threat to the village infrastructure. So another example of the soil degradation is the erosion of the on the slope. There was this sand and silt slide which destroyed the motorway connecting the village of Amga with Yakutsk. So this happened in 2013. So when after this slide, the
потоки грязной воды с обвешенными частицами ила
the permafrost,
в
which
реке
was
Крестях,
exposed on the
загрязняя ее и
slope, started
вызывая резкое
melting,
увеличение уровня воды.
so which
В
led to the
результате этого были
increased water
подтоплены и
level.
загрязнены илом сенокосные угодья
So
вдоль
the
речки
water and the silt
Крестях. Очень много стогов
damaged the
сена были унесены
pastures
потоком грязной
and
воды, причинив колоссальные
the
убытки
haymaking grounds.
сельхозаготовителям.
So
Даже
they
мост через реку Крестях был
bringing
уничтожен.
economical
Грязная
losses
вода
to the
попала в реку
farmers.
Амга, и на многие почти на
Also,
месяц
this
вниз по течению
dirty
вода в
silt
реке стала непригодна для
water
питья, для хозяйственных нужд.
polluted
Причиной
the
этого
river and
оползня является два
deteriorated the
фактора.
quality of the
Во-первых, это
water.
природный, это,
So
как мы знаем,
there
глобальное потепление
were
климата, второй это антропогенный
two
пожары,
reasons.
которые
First,
уничтожили
natural
лес
reason for this
на водоразделе
slide
на склоне
because
этого
of
места,
the climate change
и
and
когда
global warming.
сезон
And the
опалый слой
second
увеличился
reason was anthropogenic
почти
impact
на метр
because of the
увеличился,
forest
и из-за
fires
этого
induced by people, so which led
утаивание
to the
подземных льдов и обрушение вот этого места.
thinner, actually
В
thicker
условиях
active layer.
глобального потепления климата идет
So under
активизация
the
криогенных
global
процессов на
warming,
территории
the
многолетних межных пород.
cryogenic
Наше наблюдение за
processes
температурой грунтов
activate.
заброшенной пашни около села
So
Бекюня в
we
Линского
arranged
в
the
2018-2020
temperature
годах показали
monitoring
рост
of
среднемесячных
soil
температур.
in
Так,
the years
например, температура августа и
2018
сентября
through
2018 года
2020.
по сравнению с 2019
So
годом
compared with
изменились
2019, the
2,6 до
temperature in the
3,8
summertime
градусов в августе и
changed
с 4 до 5 градусов в сентябре. На остальные месяцы
by
тоже
like
показывают
1
рост
degrees
среднемесячных температур.
Celsius.
Ну вот, вы в виде графика это
So you
показали.
see this
Вот,
on the
например,
graph.
синий график это
So
18
the
год,
blue line for
красная
2018
линия
and
это
the
19
red
год,
one for
да, и
2019.
вот серая
And
линия это 20 год. И в этом месте, как и вот, да, в
so
Чурапче,
like in Chorapcha
были
area,
розданы территории
so this
для
place
строительства домов,
was
частных
allotted
домов и так далее. И с
for
высоты,
housing.
значит, птичьего полета это место выглядит следующим
And
образом.
so
Здесь мы можем
now
видеть
how it looks
дороги,
like. So we
улицы,
see
которые были
streets and
заложены
motorways
под, ну, под улицы, да, и здесь должны были стоять уже
and
дома. Но
houses were
произошло,
supposed to stand
до
here,
сего дня
but
там
this what happened.
ни один дом не построен,
So
потому что земля там вообще непригодна для
no
строительства.
houses have been built there because
Таким образом,
it's not
Андийский улус
suitable.
расположен в пределах широкого развития пород ледового комплекса, причем
So Amgar Ulus is
специфические
located
высоколюдические
in
образования
the
развиты как на
permafrost
уровне
area.
альпийских террас, так и могут
So,
встречаться линии шлепок на водораздельных типах местности.
These
В этих
icy
условиях
grounds,
сплошная
they
выработка
are seen
лесного
on
покрова
the
приведет к
both on the
вытаиванию сильно
terraces
листьев
and
грунтов.
on the lower
В этом
banks.
отношении
So, which
запрещение
means
строительства
that
крупных лесозаготовительных предприятий в верхнем и среднем течении Амги служит одним из
we
действенных
should
приемов сохранения природной среды в данном регионе.
prevent cutting of forests in this area, which will help to maintain forests here. Now the floor goes to Lyudmila Argunova, the head of the Youth Climatic Sector at EGE Ecological Education Center. Good afternoon, good evening, dear colleagues. Let me introduce our educational project to be implemented this year, but because of the pandemic, it has been postponed, but we hope to implement it. So first I would like to tell about EGE Environmental Education Center, where our youth group functions. So the main mission is to build an ecological worldview among the population and to support public initiatives for sustainable development of the civil society in the Republic. Also to raise the level of ecological culture and proper nature management, and also some
развития гражданского общества Республики Саха-Якутия. Общественная организация Центра экологического просвещения ЭИГЕ работает уже более 20
So
лет по
the
3
gas
направлениям, которые вы
center
видите на
has
слайде.
been
Это
working for
экологическое образование
20 years in
подрастающего
3
поколения
directions,
и экологическое
which
просвещение
are
среди широких
environmental
кругов населения.
education of
А
children
также
and
ведется
youth
работа по
and
созданию
general
ресурсного центра
public,
для экоактивистов, для
environmental
экологических
projects, and
некоммерческих
also resource
организаций.
center for supporting public
За 23
initiatives.
года
Over
реализовано более
23
50
years,
проектов
we have
на
implemented
международные,
over
российские
50
и
projects
республиканские гранты. Это проекты и программы
with the
экологического
support of
образования молодежи и
international,
детей,
federal, and
экологического
republic's
просвещения широких слоев
grants.
населения, ведение
So
экологического
these are the
водного и
projects
лесного
on
мониторинга силами учащейся молодежи и школьников.
outreach,
Таким образом, мы
and
оснастили офисным и полевым
so we
оборудованием
have
для
equipped
ведения экологического
with
мониторинга
office and
более
field
40 общественных
equipment
объединений
over
по
40
республике.
public
Реализовали десятки
groups
природоохранных
in the
проектов,
republic
экопросветительских и экообразовательных
and
издательских проектов,
implemented a variety of
устойчивого развития и
environmental
энергоресурсосбережения в
projects on
образовательных
sustainable
детских
development
учреждениях.
and
И главное наше
energy
достижение – это
conservation.
создание
And our
республиканской
main
сети
goal
общественного
is
экологического мониторинга и
establish
контроля.
the network
С
of
1996 года мы
ecological
издаем
monitoring.
экологический бюллетень для экологических активистов и
So
некоммерческих
since
организаций,
1996, we
который
have
называется
been
«Северное
publishing
сияние» и ряд
a
методических
newsletter,
образовательных
Northern
пособий.
Lights,
Также мы
for
открыли первый ресурсный
activists, and
центр для
also
НКО в республике в
we
1998 году.
launched the first resource
Создали
center
республиканскую
for
сеть
NGOs in
СОЭП,
the
в
Republic
которой
in
вошли сеть водного
1998,
мониторинга,
and
сеть школ
also we
образования для
created the
устойчивого
Republic's
развития,
network of
сеть
public
школьных
environmental
лесничеств, зеленая
monitoring,
сеть коренных малочисленных
which
народов
includes
Севера, агрошколы, а
the
также ячейки,
network of
ведущие
water
общественный контроль за
monitoring,
деятельностью
of education
промышленных
schools for
организаций.
sustainable development, and so
Мы проводим
on.
обучение по фандрайзингу с проведением мини-грантовых
So we
экологических конкурсов, провели
also
грантовый конкурс
hold
социальных проектов на средства
workshops on
ОАО «Поле
raising
золота»,
funds.
администрируем конкурс малых экологических грантов Альянса «Экодела» в Якутии. Организовали в республике первые 3 ярмарки
So we
некоммерческих
organized the first 3
организаций, также
fairs
проводим
for
общественно-экологическую
non-profit
экспертизу проектов,
organizations.
оказывающих
Also,
негативное
we carry
воздействие на
out
природную
the
среду
public
и
and
здоровье
environmental
населения. Организуем
expert
различные экологические акции.
reviews
Подходя к нашей
of
молодежной группе,
different projects.
мы были созданы во время участия в первом республиканском слете сети общественного экологического мониторинга в сентябре прошлого года.
So our
Куда
youth
мы,
group
группа
was
студентов, были
established
приглашены в качестве волонтеров.
last
Слет
year.
был проведен Центром экологического просвещения ЭйГИ. В нашей группе молодежи 9 человек из
We have
разных
9
институтов и
young
факультетов
people
ИСУ.
from different
В команде
departments of
проекта
the
также у
Northeastern
нас
Federal
есть
University.
наши специалисты, ученые,
We also have
экоактивисты, которые вы также видите на слайде.
scientists and
Одним из направлений работы
eco-activists. And one of the
сети
directions of
общественного экологического
the
мониторинга было сельское хозяйство и
environmental
экология, которое нас
monitoring
очень
network
заинтересовало, и мы вошли в эту группу ячеек, в
is
которую входит группа
the
экологов-общественников из центральной группы сельхозулусов и представителей агрошкол.
agricultural sector.
Республика Саха-Якутия – самый
So
большой
our
регион
republic
России,
is the
как вы
largest
знаете.
entity of the
И
Russian
ее
Federation,
площадь
and you
составляет
know that
18% площади
its
России.
area makes
Якутия
18%
высококонтинентальный климат
of the
и зона
entire
повсеместного
Russian
распространения
area.
личной мерзлоты.
It has
Коренные жители Якутии в сельской местности и в большинстве
continental
своем ведут
climate, and
традиционное
the
градопользование.
majority of
Разводят
the
лошадей,
rural
крупный рогатый
population
скот,
is
оленей,
involved in
занимаются
traditional
земледелием, охотой, собирательством и рыболовством.
reindeer herding
Последний год
or
развивается
cattle
туризм,
and
в том
horse
числе
breeding.
внутренний агротуризм.
And one of the
С
new
каждым годом
industries
общество
is
все
tourism,
заметнее изменение
and
глобального
every year
климата.
the global
Большое
climate
международное руководство
change
ведет научные исследования
is
изменений
becoming
глобального
more
климата.
and more
Особенно
manifested,
сильно влияние глобального потепления
and
ощущается на территориях
the impact
распространения
of global
многолетних
warming
пермских
is
полос.
especially seen in the
Об этом мы
areas of
сегодня все говорим.
continuous permafrost.
И если говорить о наших жителях сельских поселений,
And if
они
we are talking
отмечают
about the
достаточно
rural
много
population, they
явления тайки, эрозии, появления трещин и оврагов в результате деградации
the
греолитозоны, которые
appearance of
уже делают
hollows
земли
and
непригодными для
ravines in
использования
villages
в качестве
which make
сельхозугодий,
the
в
grounds
качестве земель
unsuitable
под
for
индивидуальное
agricultural uses
строительство. Вот,
and for
например,
construction.
в селе Синск в
For example, in the
2018
village
году
of Sinsk in
некоторые участники,
2018,
некоторые участники, которые стали членами нашей группы, ездили в село
some
Синск
members
по
of
проекту
our
«Полевая
group
школа
went
РГО»,
there.
и там проводили замеры оврага.
So they measured
Вот.
the
Некоторые
ravine,
овраги уже подходят к
and some
зданию,
of the ravines they are
к
getting
жилым зданиям, к
closer to
административным зданиям села.
houses
Вот, что
in
мы
the village.
очень ярко можем заметить и по карте. У нас в республике
So which can be
очень
clearly
развита
seen on
сеть
the map.
агрошкол.
So agricultural
Научно
schools are
исследовательская
very
деятельность,
common
которую
in
они
our republic.
ведут, мы хотели бы таких вот очень, так сказать, инициативную молодежь привлечь именно из агрошкол.
And
Потому что
these
большинство из
agro
нас, будучи
schools
школьниками, сами активно
actually
занимались
are the
исследовательской
source
работой
of
и
new
принимали
members.
участие в
So we
научно-практических
want to
конференциях, как
involve
«Шаг в
most
будущее». Это
active
самая
of
такая
them.
крупная
So we
конференция
used to be very active
нашей
as well.
республики.
So like we, for example,
Мы хотим привлечь эту большую армию
participated in the Step to the
школьников-исследователей к
Future
сбору
conference.
информации
So
о
we
влиянии
want to
глобального изменения
involve
климата
these young
на ландшафты природных
researchers
экосистем к
to our
расположенных в конечном
monitoring,
месте,
so they
ведения
could
сельского хозяйства,
monitor the
состояние пастбищ,
changes
сенокосных угодий и пахотных
and
земель.
monitor the
Для этого
states
мы привлечем
of
к этой работе сеть общественного
pastures
экологического
and
мониторинга, в которую входят много ячеек,
agricultural
возглавляемые
grounds.
школьными учителями, которые могут поставить
And also
необходимые
school
задачи перед
teachers, they
молодыми
could
исследователями и
help
руководить
us
их
because
работой.
they could
Цель
supervise
нашего
this
проекта
work. So the
так,
goal of
сейчас.
our project is
Изучение влияния
to study the
глобального
impact
климата
of
на
global
ведение
climate
сельского
change
хозяйства
on
в Центральной
agriculture in
Якутии силами
Central
школьников и
Yakutia
молодежи для
by school
долгосрочного
children
планирования и
and youth
устойчивого
for long-term
землепользования.
sustainable land
Для
use
этой цели
planning.
мы хотим собрать
So we want
активистов
to
из числа молодых исследователей из
find
вузов Центральной Якутии,
groups of
организовать
volunteers
агроэкологический
from
мониторинг,
young researchers
собрать
to
данные о состоянии
organize
сельхозугодий, в том числе архивных
ecological
данных за последние
monitoring
30 лет, собранные
and collect
волонтерами,
the
и их
data on
анализ.
agricultural
Второе,
lands
информирование и распространение
state
полученных данных в целях
and
принятия управленческих
then
решений по
share
адаптации к
this
изменению климата.
information.
Как говорил Себастьян Мallgate,
As
мы
Sebastian
хотим стать той
mentioned,
молодежью,
we
которую
want to become
услышат
this
наше
youth
правительство,
which
наша
will be
администрация
heard
и
by
поднимутся
our
общественники.
government
И
and
мы
by
хотим
other
добиться вот
circles.
следующих целей
So
позитивных, которые
these
приведут
are
к
the
итогам
positive changes
реализации
we
нашего
are
проекта.
expecting to have.
Спасибо, Людмила. Давайте вместе работать
Спасибо
дальше.
за внимание.
So
Да, вот наши
thank you,
контакты,
Людмила.
пожалуйста,
So here
фотографируйте.
are our contacts.
Спасибо.
Передаю слово Никите Ивановичу
Now the
Тананаеву,
floor goes
научному
to
сотруднику
Nikita
Института
Tananaev,
мезоповедения
a researcher from
приглашенному
Permafrost
профессору
Institute and
университета
invited
города
professor
Тулуза. Он здесь у
of the
нас
University of
в зале.
Toulouse. So he's here.
Добрый вечер, здравствуйте, спасибо
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me
площадке сегодня.
to talk on this platform. I have a presentation I would like to share.
Да, спасибо большое. Когда я предлагал несколько вариантов тем на выбор, о которых я мог
So I had a number of topics I could talk.
буквально пару слов расскажу о том, как меняется климат, как вслед за ним меняются мерзотные
So my task was to talk about the changing climate and how it affects the permafrost landscapes from several perspectives, and one of them is educational one.
Хотелось бы просто напомнить, чтобы все это
So I would like to remind
уверен в том, что правда это или нет, но это уже считаю доказанный факт, что современные
I think this is proven already, proven that the current changes of climate are caused by anthropogenic emission of greenhouse gases. So it's a proven fact. So this is a climatic consensus. What climate changes are we talking about? Because this is like general educational part. So we are talking about temperature anomalies of the air and ocean compared against the reference years of 1900, 1950. And you see that the graphs are quite identical. So we have the correlation with the high concentration of greenhouse gas concentrations in the air. Well, some people often say that in the previous history of Earth there were warm periods, so why human beings are responsible for that? So here we see the climatic history over a long period of time. And so we see that recently, like in 2010s, the concentration of carbon dioxide was maximum, really maximum. So this is obviously an industrial and anthropogenic impact. So we have carbon dioxide budget, and it is published in major sources. So we have this 33% increase, which hasn't been seen over the past 800,000 years. So why am I talking about this? Because there is a great difference between the reality and the perception of this reality by the public opinion. So in reality, 97% of climatologists agree with the statement that the modern changes are triggered by greenhouse gases. But the public believes that that some 30–50% of scientists agree on that. So the public doesn't actually understand the consensus of the academia. In fact, all the scientists agree on that. So the second assumption is that by 2100 the climate warming can make from 4 to 8 degrees Celsius, with 4 being an optimistic scenario. So we have the climatic models. They assume several scenarios depending on different CO2 concentrations. There are 3 major scenarios. So with the emission being 0 by 2050, but we have RCP 8.5. When we don't change anything, what is going to happen? So the main factor of the climate change is the radiation disbalance caused by greenhouse gases emission. So you see the scenarios are different in terms of this radiation forcing. So they all stabilize at the point of 2100, starting from very optimistic to quite pessimistic. There are some doubts about the feasibility of our climatic models, but actually, so how good indicators of future they are. But if we compare them with the actual data, we see that the actual data corresponds quite well with the models done before. So the green one is quite optimistic, but the red one is pessimistic. So what is going to happen if we don't reduce emissions? So what's going to happen here in central Yakutia? You have numbers in the table. So we have the relative changes of the mean annual temperature from 1.5 to 2 degrees to 7 degrees
исторический период наблюдений климатических, 1930-2010 год. Основная черта климатических изменений будущего. Следующий слайд, пожалуйста. Это резкое потепление зимних месяцев.
The major change will be warmer winters, warmer temperatures in winter.
Ну и вы видите, что основная часть изменений, ну, мы
So,
больше смотрим на крайние правые колонки.
So we focus on the far right columns of the tables. So this is the with the same level of emissions.
Собирается меняться. Ну вот видите, в основном теплеют зимние месяцы.
So you see that the most increase is seen in winter months, in December, January, and also by 2100, October will become a month with positive temperatures.
Значит, вот отлично, здесь остановимся. Значит, к чему приведет это в разрезе температуры почвы? Ну, температура воздуха это одно.
So how is going to affect the soil temperature?
Мы выполнили моделирование теплового режима горных пород.
So we made the modeling of rocks in central Yakutia.
2 градуса, 200 на 200 километров. Вот. И к чему, как видно, это приведет?
So we see that this global warming
резко сместится вниз и к 2100 году примерно достигнет
by 2100 the freezing point will be start from 5 meters. Now the active layer which melts in summer is only 2.5 meters. So the major changes fall on the year 2080. So which is going to lead to unfavorable cryogenic processes. So first thermal denudation. It's a common process in the tundra Arctic area. Then ravine thermoerosion, which we seen on previous presentations. Then the shore thermoerosion and thermoabrasion. On the left, it's the village of Khatasy, which is really close to Yakutsk. So with the increased water temperature, the process will even accelerate. So thermokarst, you've seen lots of images like this. So thank you. Thank you, Nikita. And now I'm giving the floor to Albina Cherepanova. I have learned that there is a legal initiative on permafrost, so please tell us about this. Good evening, dear participants. Thank you for the invitation. Sitting at this session, it's very rapid, like the exploration of the Arctic, and I see very good images which can make a good textbook on climate change. So the Northern Forum creates conditions for new insights, for trying new ideas, for forming new teams from various fields. I would like to remind that the area of our Republica makes over 3 million square kilometers. It's a huge territory. So it's well, sort of like territorial unit after India. So, and the entire territory is covered by permafrost, and 70% of The Russian Federation also lies in the permafrost zone. So my topic is permafrost as an indicator of the society's attitude towards northern nature. So I'm going to talk more about legal issues. So when you fly over our territory, you've seen a lot of cut forests. So you'll see like almost a network of empty spaces covering the Republic. If we look the territory affected by forest fires, you see some dramatic figures. 2011, the area covered by forest fires made 9,000 square kilometers. In 2014, 12,000. In the year 2017, 16,000. In the year 2018, 32,000, and with the loss being over 1 billion rubles. Again, comparing with other countries of the world, Belgium has the area of 30,000 kilometers. So this is the territory we lose to forest fires every year. And in July 2019, we had 11,000 square kilometers affected by forest fires. I'm not talking about this year because we are experiencing some difficult times. And this July, we see that 13,000 were under forest fires during one day. So, unfortunately, this is a problem for coming days, because you don't think that they will put the fire off and the problem is over. No, we will face empty areas and new problems. So it changes the landscape completely. So I'm moving to the legal aspect, and I'm proud for my republic because we are the only constituent entity of the Russian Federation which has adopted the regional law on protecting permafrost in the Sakha Republic Yakutia. It was adopted in 2018. So it stipulates the environmental protection in the Republic.
Инженерный аспект натоведения, это найти равновесие техногенной и криолитогенной систем.
Our task is to find the balance between the technogenic and cryolithogenic systems. So the climate is changing, and we must find a key to respond to these changes. So we must respond to either optimistic or pessimistic scenarios. So we see when the wrong maintenance of the building led to this result. Several times we had some discussions with experts from various industries, from academia, from the general public, and we discussed the prospects of constructing on permafrost, and we developed some recommendations, and I would like to voice them today. So there have been various proposals, legal and professional. And I think we are going to develop a resolution and we will address the heads of the Republic, the government, and the State Assembly of the Republic. We think that the law like this must be also on the federal level, the law of the Russian Federation on protection and rational use of permafrost in the Russian Federation. Because when industrial companies come to the Arctic, they work in the same way like they work in the European part of Russia. And if a law like this is adopted, it will help to regulate the activities in the north.
В законах, нормативных актах были параметры объективные, необходима разработка норм устойчивости вечной мерзлоты.
And to make those laws viable, of course, we need to develop the standards of permafrost sustainability and how to introduce them into laws. All the people of Yakutia and in the Arctic must understand the state of permafrost. So that's why it is necessary to develop a program on permafrost monitoring. But it's not a cheap project, but we can use the resource of students and school children. So I think the Permafrost Institute and the Northeastern Federal University can contribute. Also, I think we don't have a unified body which is going to unite people from different institutions. So I think a coordination council on geocryological problems of Yakutia is a need.
Кроме того, мы считаем необходимо вести
Also, we think that the problems of permafrost studies in the curricula at secondary schools and higher educational institutions of the Republic. So our younger generations must understand what permafrost is and how important it is. And also you see how yourself how intensive the exploration of Yakutia is with this the power of Siberia and so on. And newcomers, people who come here to develop for this industrial project.
Дальнейшей эскалации потепления и расширения площадей горно-промышленного освоения Якутии необходимо создавать программы образования.
We need to educate people like this who come to the Republic and are not familiar with the local conditions. So we should organize, well, maybe short-term courses for people. First of all, for managers of companies, courses on permafrost studies. So we are experts from various industries, but our common task is a sensible approach to exploring the Arctic and the rational use of permafrost. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for accepting our invitation and for your proposals. We are going to include them in our final resolution. And now the floor goes to Evgeny Rashkovsky, the head of the Volunteer Green Arctic Movement.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Скажите, пожалуйста, как меня слышно?
Good day, dear colleagues. Can you hear me?
Слышно хорошо.
Да, спасибо большое.
Thank you.
Я рад всех приветствовать.
I'm glad to greet everyone
с территории Ямал-Ненецкого округа,
from Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Okrug, from this city of Salihard.
хотел бы
I would like
всех поздравить
to
заинтересованных,
congratulate
да и не только, прекрасным днем, это
everyone
Международный день туризма
on
сегодня.
the Day of
Праздником коллеги,
Tourism.
потому что вся наша
It's
деятельность,
a
да,
great
Арктика, это
day,
в первую
and
очередь
the Arctic
путешествие, это
means
как называется туризм.
traveling
Вся
or
наша жизнь, мне кажется,
tourism.
сплошной
So I
туризм,
think
поэтому
our entire life
сильно
is
постараюсь вас не задерживать.
a trip.
Очень много интересного сказали коллеги,
So
предыдущие спикеры.
previous
Вот, за что
speakers
им огромное спасибо. Огромное спасибо
provided
организаторам, что
very
пригласили
interesting
выступить,
information.
поделиться небольшим опытом.
And I
На
would
самом
like
деле мы
to
уже
share
работаем
our
давно,
experience.
2014
We started
года.
our work in 2014,
2012 мы работаем на Арктических островах.
and from
Мы буквально
2012
пару
we have been
организации.
working on the Arctic Islands. So a few words about our organization.
Общественная межрегиональная экологическая
So
организация
this is a
«Зеленая Арктика».
non-governmental
Мы родились
organization,
как раз-таки
Green
на
Arctic.
экологических уборках на островах, на арктических.
Started
Первый наш проект был остров Белый,
this
где мы с
ecological
ребятами,
cleaning
начиная с
of
2012
Arctic
по
Islands.
2016
So
год, как
in the
раз-таки
period
занимались
2012 to
экологической уборкой.
2016, we
Вот.
cleared
И там-то как раз-таки
several
вот в
islands.
этой работе, в этом
And
процессе
during this
родился
process,
образ и впоследствии юридическая
we
наша
came the
любимая
idea
всеми организация
of
«Зеленая Арктика».
establishing this movement.
Я бы хотел сказать пару слов о нашем твердом правиле. Я очень его люблю. Встал поутру, умылся, привел себя в порядок и сразу же приведи в порядок свою планету.
Small princess
Это
rule.
экология в
So when you
действии.
wake up in the
Вот. Но
morning,
на самом деле это
wash
фраза с
yourself
маленького принца, если
and
кто-то читал. Вот.
clean yourself and then
Всегда
clean your
начинаю с
planet.
такой вот фразы, потому что
So this
очень
is
с этим
our
согласен.
slogan.
Нужно на самом
Because
деле
we
смотреть
completely agree
вокруг
with
себя, что
it.
происходит, да?
You must look around what is going on.
Зеленая Арктика — это
So
многогранная
the Green
организация.
Arctic today is a
волонтерский отряд для
multifaceted
участия в
organization.
экологических
So
экспедициях в арктических
we
территориях.
arrange
конечно, следуя
groups of
мировой
volunteers for
стратегии
various Arctic
отношений к
expeditions.
арктической территории, наша организация
So
продолжает миссию по восстановлению экологического
we
баланса и
continue
очистке
our mission on
захламленных территорий.
cleaning
Мы предоставляем молодым и активным людям, тем, кто
waste
строит
grounds
наше
in
настоящее
the
и будущее,
Arctic.
нашей страны на своем опыте испытать всю степень хрупкости и незащищенности
So
природы от
we give this
неосознанного
opportunity
влияния
to
на
see
нее
the
человека.
vulnerability of the
Я
Arctic.
параллельно буду говорить, и вот на слайде вы можете посмотреть,
So
есть
on
форматы
the
наших
slide you
работ,
see what
сколько
we are
добровольцев у
doing,
нас
so how
принимает
many
участие,
volunteers we have,
сколько мы уже убрали, и в этом году ближе
1,600 tons of metal scrap collected and sent to recycling. So 18 to 55 is the age of the members. So our major task is the environmental education. So to make people understand the importance of environmental protection.
Арктическая зона Российской Федерации, сохранение планеты. Закончив огромную работу на острове
So, having completing huge work on Belly Island, we started the cleaning of Vilkitsky Island. So the works are continuing there. Even this year, during coronavirus pandemic, some groups managed to go there. Unfortunately, our foreign participants were not able to come, but Russian young people came. But luckily, no one is on these islands but polar bears. So our members also take part in some environmental field trips to assess the impact of. So we don't only clean, but we also help the scientists to collect data. So we assess the territory around Honduran
Это однозначно феномен
minefield.
очень необычный.
So
И
it's
в этом
the
году
area
ребята
where lots of
наши как раз-таки
sea
поехали вместе
lions,
с учеными и совершили там,
walruses
скажем так, небольшую локальную уборку.
came.
Вот,
So our
ученые продолжили изучать
members went there and
данный
they
феномен.
cleaned
Ну, я
the
думаю, что к концу года
territory,
мы,
and
наверное, получим
by the
какие-то
end of the
данные
year we are
по
going to
данному
receive
прибытию
the
моржей.
information why these walruses
Новый интересный вектор для нас в 2020 году.
liked
Мы
this,
вышли
chose this area.
на такую экспедицию, как экосоциологическая экспедиция, назвали
So
ее
we
«Полярная земля».
also have
Первый раз для
this
нас
polar
это первый опыт.
land
Первый раз мы проводили на
expedition.
территории село Сейха, это Ямальский район.
So we went
Именно в
to
поселении,
Chakra
где живут
Village,
люди.
where
И это
people
тоже
live,
очень непростой был опыт,
and it was
но я
also
считаю,
an
что с ним справились.
interesting
В
experience.
течение 21 дня мы чистили,
For 21 days
очищали несанкционированную
we
свалку вдоль
cleaned
береговой линии речки Сейха.
waste
И
ground
впервые мы получили
near the
очень
village.
бесценный опыт работы именно с жителями, да,
So
в
this was the
контексте
first experience
формирования
of working
общего
with
плана
local
устойчивого развития данной
population,
территории.
how to work
И я считаю, что за
jointly
этим
on
вектором наше
the
будущее.
sustainable development
Есть тоже
plan.
очень позитивные, да, последствия
So
нашей работы.
we
И
have
это тоже
seen
очень
some
интересно. Но
positive
еще раз хочу сказать, что времени
changes.
не очень так много. Я по каждому мероприятию
Well,
готов сделать огромную
I am pressed
презентацию,
for
потому что
time,
работа
but I
проделана очень огромная.
actually can tell a lot
В этом
about
году
each of
нами
our
было принято
projects.
усилить наш фильтр отбора
This
именно
year we
волонтеров
decided
полного
to have
для участия в арктических экспедициях, да и вообще, в принципе, во всех наших
a stricter
экспедициях сейчас.
selection of our
Это
members.
называется проект комплексной подготовки эко-волонтеров.
So we are
Вот,
working on the
дистанционный курс по
comprehensive
экологии и волонтерской деятельности
training
в
of
условиях
our
крайнего севера.
volunteers. So we have developed an online course for volunteers who are willing to work in the Arctic.
Начали отбор претендентов в
Last
образовательную
March
программу.
we
В завершенной
started
кампании приняло участие
the admission to
267
our
человек.
program.
По результатам тестирования мы отобрали
We had
141 участник, из них
260
73 парня, 68
applicants,
девушек.
but we chose
Данная программа
140
это
out
дистанционный
of
курс
them.
по
So this
экологии и
is
волонтерской
an
деятельности в условиях
online
крайнего
course
севера,
for volunteers
который именно
in the
прошел в
High
формате
North.
онлайн-уроков 3 раза в неделю.
So
В
3
качестве
times a
спикеров
week
на
they
курс
had
выступали ученые, экологи,
classes
городские
with
экоактивисты, знатоки современных
scientists,
экотрендов и
with
медиаплощадок,
public
политологи,
figures,
реабилитолог,
with
спасатели,
politicians,
полярники.
with
То есть тем самым, что,
people
собственно
from
говоря, мы
rescue
сделали, да?
agencies and
То есть
so on.
основные цели нашего проекта
So the main task
повысить
of the
общий уровень
project
знания
was to
экологической
increase
просвещенности и
the
осознанности населения,
educational
усовершенствовать
awareness
процесс
of the
отбора и подготовки
population and
волонтеров
to
зеленой
improve
Арктики.
the selection of volunteers for our
У
projects.
нас закончилось время.
Ага. Хорошо, я тогда разрешите мне буквально пару слов, я
Just a
просто
couple
хотел
of
бы, да,
words
закончить.
to conclude.
Вот буквально 3 секундочки, да. В общем, мы видим за данной программой именно подготовки волонтера будущее.
So we see this volunteer training program as very promising.
Да, конечно же, не все смогут, наверное, попасть, но та часть,
So
которая не сможет
not
попасть,
all
она как раз-таки сможет,
young people who
скажем
take
так,
part in our
подготовить, да,
projects
вот с помощью
can
наших
take this
спикеров,
program,
подготовить
but
с помощью наших спикеров себе
with the help of
портфель
our
для
speakers,
дальнейших
they
выступлений и
can
просто для трансляции вот экологических данных. Вот, в общем-то, у нас
become
такой месседж, такой посыл именно
So this is our
параллельно по
message.
экспедициям
So
образовывать именно
along with
ребят,
our
которые
field
хотят
trips, we
участвовать в
want
них.
to
Вот, всем спасибо за
train
внимание, спасибо и
young members of our organization.
следующему спикеру.
Thank you, and I am giving the floor to the next speaker. Thank you, Evgeny, for sharing your experience. And if we have some time, we would like to have the video from Victoria Bushman, the researcher from the University of Washington, Greenland Institute of Natural Resources.
Hi, good morning from Greenland. My name is Victoria Bushman, and I'm an Inuk conservation biologist originally from Ecological, Alaska, but I live now here in Nuuk, Greenland. I'm pre-recording this presentation for you, so bear with me. Today we're going to talk a little bit about a project that was completed in 2019 called the Arctic Wetlands and Indigenous Peoples Study. And today specifically, I'm going to talk about how the lessons we learned from this study can be applied to ecological research more broadly within Indigenous homelands. This project was funded by NSF, and the conservation of Arctic flora and fauna was a large participant, and the Fulbright Commission in Iceland. And we're just going to get right into it. So the study was a circumpolar study that I was the lead scientist on that looked at 35 protected areas in 8 different Arctic countries. And this spans 7 different indigenous groups. Now you'll notice that the representation across the different countries looks like there was a heavy emphasis on Europe, but we did really want to capture at least a few protected areas that included wetlands in all the different Arctic countries. And just because Europe is a little bit smaller, we see that there seems to be quite a few in a very particular area. But it was more that we wanted to be comprehensive about what kinds of protected areas we were looking at. We wanted a diversity of different ecosystem types within wetlands. And we really wanted to cover a wide range of different indigenous communities and governance structures to look at how indigenous communities are engaging in wetland protected areas, how they're using these resources that are within the protected areas, and essentially how indigenous communities are contributing to the conservation of endangered species, to the protection of critical ecosystem types, and so forth. So to structure this project, I looked at a number of different kinds of information that was both quantitative and qualitative, pulled from management plans, conservation plans, participation plans, and communicated quite often with the management authorities at these different sites to look at 7 specific kinds of information. Who are the management authorities? What are the management actions? What are the conservation actions? What are the species that are being protected? What does Indigenous use look like? What does Indigenous participation in these protected areas look like? And what environmental concerns we might have. So throughout the 35 protected areas, we were able to categorize a little bit of the information that we received. Not all of the information was received necessarily from the management authorities, because some of the information, particularly in Greenland and Russia, is actually recorded more by academic institutions and folks who have a little bit more capacity to be recording data on these kinds of activities. Our first important finding that I think is really important when we consider ecological research is that Indigenous communities across the Arctic are continuing to use protected areas. And I don't mean that this is a bad thing, I don't mean that this is a good thing, but it is something that is happening, and it's something that is more or less missed in a lot of data and management plans and things like this. So we see across our 35 protected areas, 5.7% of them are continuing to be used for subsistence farming. 45.7% are continuing to be used for herding, which is either the herding of reindeer or sheep in some cases. 42.9% are being used for gathering, so that's looking at collecting plants and berries, mushrooms, these sort of things. 65.7% of the protected areas included in the study were used also for fishing, both freshwater and along the adjacent coastlines. 74.2% were used for hunting, and this includes not only terrestrial hunting, but some protected areas which were included in this study were marine protected areas. So this includes the hunting of different marine species such as seals, whales, things like this. And then if we look at all of the sites combined, 82.9% of them are still being used by Indigenous communities. So this is significant and important, and the reason that it's important to ecological research is because it's something that's not really captured in what we write into management and conservation plans. It's not something we really account for when we're looking at species at risk. I would also like to point out, however, that the use of these areas is actually usually quite legal, and that a lot of indigenous communities across the circumpolar Arctic have special permissions to be involved in these protected areas and to be using these protected areas. So it's not a legality issue, it's just an issue that when we're considering what's happening on the landscape, we're not taking into account what indigenous communities are doing, what resources they need access to, what that availability is, and how we as land managers and conservation biologists can support indigenous communities to continue some of their practices, as many of their practices as are sustainable, in a way that is beneficial to indigenous communities, but also helps us achieve our local and global conservation targets and goals. Among this, we were also looking at what management authority is given to indigenous communities, because many of them obviously are still using these protected areas. So we looked at land ownership and also management authority, whether or not they can be engaged legally within the management of that area. Land ownership, 25.7% of the protected areas have indigenous land ownership. So they're owned either privately or in collaboration with a government entity, either at the regional level or the national level. But 25.7% is actually quite in line with the global average currently under the last IPBES report. So it matches quite well to what we're seeing globally, that indigenous communities are owning and managing about 1/4 to 1/3 of all protected areas in the world. And then we see down here at management authority, so you can use the space, indigenous communities can use the space, but how are they able to be involved in the decision-making processes and the management of those particular spaces? We found that 34.2% of these protected areas allowed indigenous management, indigenous engagement in the management of these spaces. And of course, we had some not reporting, and you'll notice that these numbers don't add up to 100%, and that's because management is a little bit more complicated in that you might have many different actors who are involved in the management of a space at the state level, at the regional level. And so these numbers more reflect who is allowed to be engaged rather than a across-the-board number. And finally, the last thing that I'd like to share with you is some of our conclusions about wetlands management. First of all, most management plans do fail to document these indigenous uses, so we aren't seeing a complete picture of resource use or management. And this isn't meant to increase control over what indigenous communities are doing. This is meant to be helpful because there are some management actions that actually put indigenous communities at greater risk of food insecurity. So we do need to make sure that our management actions, our conservation actions, aren't unnecessarily impeding indigenous communities from being able to engage in their livelihoods. So it is something that we need to better account for in our data and in our ecological research. The second is that this lack of information on how indigenous communities are using wetland resources is a knowledge gap that really inhibits our ability to support biodiversity and indigenous communities. We need to know more about what species are on the land, what species are critical for indigenous communities as we move forward, what species might need to be listed now that aren't, that are related to indigenous uses of space. And these things we can consider to a greater extent within our research. And then third, that improving this documentation on indigenous uses will aid the management authorities in making decisions that respect and accommodate these uses. So ensuring that indigenous communities can continue to achieve food security in these protected areas, so long as they are legally allowed to do so. That legality issue is also something that I encourage that we look at from an ecological perspective. Indigenous communities often are doing really good things for management of remote landscapes like those that we find up here in the Arctic. And so accommodating those uses and accommodating that traditional management is also really important as we look forward to achieving our local and global conservation targets and goals. And so finally, I'd just like to leave you with a few suggestions that come from this project. It would be good to document current and past Indigenous wetland resource uses. It would be good to develop protected area participation plans. So who is going to be engaged? What is the makeup of the decision-making process? Who is at the table? What will that look like? We should broaden wetland research priorities to include Indigenous perspectives because these communities are involved in wetlands and in management. And so if we want to protect these areas better, we do need to involve their perspectives. We need to support community-based wetlands monitoring. These are locations that are quite remote, and it would be good to have people on the ground who are doing a lot of the ecological data collection for these spaces. Then we should also connect beyond wetlands to include other ecosystems and processes, and this became clearly apparent when we were looking at protected areas that are in the marine landscapes or include large areas of freshwater or our high alpine wetlands. So we need to be looking beyond wetlands to include other ecological aspects of the landscape and focus a little bit on the interactions between these ecosystems. And then lastly, I would say that we should foster engagement of Indigenous knowledge holders and youth as we move forward, because these are the people who have the time and the capacity and the knowledge to be able to help as we continue our research in Arctic wetlands and look forward to a better world. So you can read more. This report was officially published at the end of 2019. You can find it on the CAF website. And with this, I'm going to leave you. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a really wonderful rest of your conference. Thank you for your attention, and take care.
Благодарим Викторию за заранее записанное видео и завершая нашу сегодняшнюю сессию, которая
We thank Victoria for the presentation, and I would like to thank all the speakers who have accepted our invitation and shared their experience. And we see what research is being done in the Arctic, and I would like to thank Vladimir Vasilyev for organizing our session. We thank the technical group of the Congress Center, and we would like to thank our interpreters Kunei Filipova and Sofia Холмогорова for interpretation. So, do we have any comments, additions? So, on this day of the statehood of our republic, let me read out the draft resolution, and we are going to post it on the Northern Forum site. So, to focus on climate change research, also to ensure the coverage of the results in the media, and also to bring the recommendation to the government, and also to to improve the environmental education of children and youth, to develop the program on establishing volunteer centers with methodological and other support. And the last thing, the last proposal, we need to introduce not only changes into the existing legislation, but also to enhance the scientific potential and to develop the standards of sustainable permafrost to be integrated into the legislation. So I thank again all the participants and speakers. Thank you.